Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peace Podcast. This is season 2, episode 45. Just give me space for my emotions, whatever that looks like. And so, really sitting and thinking about the proper way to help children with their emotions and to hold space for adults that you're in relationship with for their emotions. I started to think it's interesting that we know how to do that for other people, right? So like if my 7-year-old comes back from a weekend with his dad and he gets in the car and he's angry, which oftentimes is the case, and he's losing his mind, I can hold space for him to have that emotion. I can say, it sounds like you're angry. Do you need space? I'm going to leave you alone until you come to me and help you process your emotion or whatever it is. When there are adults who are dealing with emotion, even when it's directly related to me, there's a sense of being able to say, hey, I noticed that you're having some anger or frustration or, whatever worry, whatever it is, and you can talk them through that emotion, hold space for the emotion, tell them how you perceive the situation differently than them or whatever the case is. And whenever we're dealing with our own emotions, oftentimes we don't give ourselves that same ability. We don't give ourselves that same feeling of it's okay to sit with the emotion. It's okay to even have the emotion in the first place. Emotions aren't bad, even though you were taught that as a child in some cases, especially if you're a male, you were probably taught that any emotion beyond anger is weakness. And if you were a female, you may have been taught that, emotions are selfish. So you're not allowed, you're allowed to have the timid ones, but anything else is just, putting yourself above others, etc. And so I started thinking, why do we do that? Why is it so difficult for us to sit with our own emotions? And we want to get to the space of emotional intelligence, but we don't realize that the best training grounds for that is the emotions that we have for ourselves and developing that emotional intelligence with ourselves. And so I thought about, emotional stuffers and people who just shove down their emotions, and even those people who think that perhaps they are emotionally intelligent, but they're still not accessing their own emotions, and what those people need or what might need to happen in order for that to actually be true. Because in order to be emotionally intelligent, you have to first, in fact, deal with your own emotions. And so I said, well, this really falls into two separate spaces. If we want for there to be space for our emotions as it relates to other people, if we want there to be space for our emotions as it relates to any relationship or position that we have to understand that we have to accept our emotions before we can get to a space of emotional intelligence. And then we have to learn how to, instead of resisting them and rejecting them, accept them and then sit with them and hold space for them. So if you're at a space where you really just want to be able to be an emotionally intelligent person, not just for the people outside of you, but for yourself, if you're at a space where you feel like sitting with your emotions is super uncomfortable, but that you are, able to sit with someone else to help them process theirs, then you're in the right space, and this episode is for you. So what are some signs of emotional rejection? Because I like to go backward and go to the things that we tend to skip over and really delve into those. One of the signs of emotional rejection is that you have constant heightened big feelings, right? So you are constantly in a state of stress, fight or flight, freeze or fawn. You're always on high alert. You tend to be in a space where you're easily flustered, easily frustrated, easily scared. And those are huge indications that you have been rejecting your emotions, because your emotional bank is kind of like a cup, right? So if you're not dealing with, if you're not drinking the good things, if you're not dealing with it, the cup just keeps getting fuller and fuller and fuller. Well, at a certain point, it can only handle so much. And so once the cup is full, everything that happens beyond that cup's capacity is elevated, it's heightened, it's bigger than it needs to be. And so if you see yourself dealing with things in a more chaotic way than you maybe did in the past, that's a sign to check in with yourself and say, this sort of thing didn't bother me before, or this sort of thing hasn't bothered me in the past, and now all of a sudden every time it comes around, like, I'm feeling flustered by it. And 9 times out of 10, that emotion that you're experiencing as heightened and bigger is just a clue as to the emotions that are under it festering. So you might be able to uncover that you have some hurt that you haven't processed. You might be able to uncover that you have some resentment that you haven't processed. But once you process the things that have been in there festering for months, maybe years, then you'll have space for the other things that are happening, and those emotions won't seem to boil over and be so chaotic. So really look at yourself on a day-to-day basis and think about things that maybe fluster you that didn't used to in the past. Like if you were a person who could sit in traffic and now you can't. If you were a person who could, listen to your kids talk and talk and talk on the way home from school and now you can't. If little things that didn't used to, ignite your last nerve now are burning it to the ground, that's an indication and a clue. It's not to say this thing is really bothering me more, but it's saying, what am I stuffing down there that's not allowing space for this thing to exist and maybe annoy me a little bit, but not take me over the edge? Another sign is you have big feelings and you can't explain them. So you're walking around annoyed, but you don't know why. You're walking around and everything's making you cry at the drop of a hat and you don't know why. You're walking around angry at the world and you don't really know why. Like if someone comes up to you and says, what's going on with you? You can't really answer it because you don't really know why. And that really clues you in on, again, not being able to explain why you feel that way is usually an indicator of those emotions being bottled up for so long that you don't even know why you feel what you feel. You just know that now it's led to that hardened emotion. I talked in another podcast about how if the softer emotions are pushed down for so long, they become those harder emotions like annoyance, frustration, anger. And those emotions aren't necessarily bad, but usually they're a byproduct of shoving down the emotions that are a little bit softer because you don't think they're safe to feel. So if you're constantly walking around with big feelings that you can't explain, it's usually a sign that you've been rejecting feelings for so long that at a certain point, your body, your brain, your psyche is not strong enough to push back on those and you just exist in them. Another one that is a sign of emotional rejection is extreme contempt and frustration. Like the things that people are doing around you are just getting on your nerves. And this is not on some like, my kids leave their shoes in the middle of the floor and that's on my nerves. It's contempt, like to the point where you can't have a conversation, look at, be kind to some of the people around you because you are so annoyed by them. Now, this is another opportunity to check yourself. And I say that because there are times where you might feel contempt, and that contempt exists from a childhood wound. Like if you're a person who gets really annoyed when other people ask you for help, and that's like a constant feeling that you have, 9 times out of 10, that feeling is a result of you wanting people to have to do things on their own because you had to learn at a young age to do those things on your own too. Again, though, it's unprocessed emotion, because if you haven't tapped into that, you'll never realize why you have contempt for other people who have to rely on you instead of just figuring things out the way that you had to. And so if you walk around like that, where, you have a large group of people that you just are annoyed by constantly and frustrated with constantly, and they haven't really done much. It's just the way that you feel about them because of their mere existence. There's probably something emotionally that you've been rejecting and you haven't processed that's connected to the way you feel about them. Oftentimes, this shows you your biggest pain points because you'll notice that you're annoyed by somebody because you feel like they talk too much. This is an example. But perhaps you were a child who was silenced often. So it feels annoying to you that that person just gets to talk freely while you had to deal with a lifetime of being silenced. And now you feel like you silence yourself on, a consistent basis because you don't feel safe enough to speak. And so you get annoyed with them, which is contempt, because you're not able to hold that. But it's the great thing about having access to yourself, using yourself to collect the data that you need to change and shape and maneuver yourself, is that you can say, okay, well, what is that? Because this person just grinds my gears. What is the thing that's grinding my gears? Why am I holding contempt for this person? And I'm telling you, if you really sit with it long enough, it'll give you something that you've pushed down and rejected is the reason why you feel that contempt toward another person. And another one is, if you find yourself wanting to be constantly immersed in other people's emotions, like you always want to know what's going on with them, you thrive on hearing other people's problems, and therapists are really good at this, but they also have their own therapists because they need somebody to help them work through their own emotions. If you find yourself being immersed in other people's drama and emotions, usually it's because it's easier to help somebody else through that processing, which is kind of what we talked about earlier with kids, than it is to deal with your own innermost wounds. And so you thrive on helping other people, but you're using it really as an avoidance tactic, right? If I can help other people with their emotions, then I don't have to turn inwardly and process my own. But if you're seeking it out, if you're constantly wanting to be immersed in other people's business, drama, happenings, even if it's in a helpful way, right? Like if you're not just gossiping with them, but you're helping them, usually that's happening because you're not necessarily processing your own emotions, and by helping others, it makes you feel better, but it's not really delving into what's going on with you because you're avoiding that. It's really hard to get in and process the emotions that you've been avoiding for 30 years. It's really hard to unearth and uncover emotions that have been kept in captivity by the narrative that the people in your lives have told you. But once you start to dig in there and just uncover and unlayer and unearth some of those things, you'll realize that you need to focus on you. You have some you to be processing. You have some you to be helping yourself through. And you won't be so attracted to and consumed by helping other people with theirs. So if you're rejecting your emotions, if any of those things were true for you, that's where I would start. I would start with, and again, I don't tell you things that I haven't already gone through myself. So really starting with the things that come to the top very quickly for you and working your way in, because what starts to happen is once you process that thing, there's going to be another thing that's probably attached to it that's a little bit deeper than that. And I don't say that to scare you, because it does feel really big when I start to tell you that once you uncover one, you're going to uncover another. But it gets you to a place of freedom. It gets you to a place where you're no longer bound by the burdens that you carry, because you're breaking free from those places of bondage. You're breaking free from those things that you've always been told. You're breaking free from the emotions that have kept you where you are right now, where you constantly need to look for safety as opposed to authenticity and just being. And then once you figure out if you're rejecting your emotions and you really get into those emotions that you're rejecting, it's going to be really hard to hold space for those emotions, right? So we don't want to get emotional. We don't want to cry. We don't want to we want to hide our tears from other people. We don't want to show anger. But if you can't hold space for those emotions, then you're not going to be able to process them. You have to kind of surround yourself with all of these things that have been down in there, like you're unpacking them, and it's kind of like when you clean a closet, right? If you're anything like me, when you clean a closet, you don't just hang up some stuff and leave everything. Like when I clean, like I just did this with one of my kids' toys, I take all of the bins, everything out, and dump it out and reorganize it and get rid of the things that are no longer necessary and throw some things away and give some things away to somebody else who might need them. You have to do the same thing with your emotions that have been stuffed down there. So you pull them out, you unpack them, you put them into categories. You might realize that you can get rid of some because it's no longer burdening you. You might be able to put some lumped together because they're the same or a similar kind of emotion. And then you start to process them. But you have to hold space for them. Our natural tendency is to say, I feel this and now I got to get rid of it. Got to fix it, got to get rid of it. And we do the same thing for our kids, right? They fall, they cry, we say, oh, suck it up, or you're okay. Instead of saying, that seems like that really hurt. Do you need something from me? Is there something I can do to help you? Because we want to get them past that emotion. But if you're only feeling happiness, and if your kids are only feeling happiness, then how will you ever navigate the other emotions that exist in the world? Because you're going to have them. You're just not going to know how to deal with them. And so you have to sit with your emotions and you have to allow them. Be pissed off if you're pissed off. Be sad if you're sad. Cry if you need to cry. Scream if you need to scream. One of my most famous phrases that I say to every one of my friends or people that I care about and I'm close to, if they're going through something, I literally say, do you need a shoulder to cry on, or do you need me to hike to the top of a mountain and scream with you? Because those are the things that I feel like we avoid. We don't want to draw near to somebody and cry because we don't want to seem weak. And we don't want to walk to the top of a mountain and scream at the top of our lungs because we don't want to seem crazy. But at the same time, those are the things that we might need. And so when you sit with and you allow your emotions, you'll have an urge to do something, whether it's scream into a pillow, punch a pillow, whatever it is. And those are okay because you're holding space to allow your body to want to get rid of that emotion, but also to allow it to exist. It can be overwhelming, just like it is when you unpack that closet, when you have all these things sitting around you and you're like, oh my goodness, now I have to put them all away. But if you hold space for them, you don't let it overwhelm you because you're taking it piece by piece. You're not trying to do this complete overhaul. You're just saying, hey, there's an emotion here. I'm going to deal with this one first because I feel like it's a heavier one. Then you won't get overwhelmed by it and you won't have a feeling or an urge to run from it. Because what's going to happen when you start to process these things is that you're going to identify your biggest pain points. And pain doesn't feel good. And oftentimes, when you're a person who hasn't processed your emotions, you're also a person who doesn't like to deal with pain. So when the pain comes up to the surface, your natural inclination is going to be to run from it. It's going to be to feel overwhelmed and to be done with it. And something that I'll tell you in that space is you can still hold space without being completely consumed by it. So you can say, right now, here are some things that I can do to help sit with and process this emotion. Just like when you're cleaning, sometimes you have to walk away from it and come back. I do that so often. I did it when we did the toy clean out. We're going to walk away from this and we're going to come back to it. And then when you come back to it, you have the capacity at which to process a little more. Think of this as a chiseling away of things, as opposed to a complete renovation of things. You're just chiseling away bit by bit to try to get to the most authentic version of you. And it won't feel as overwhelming if you allow it to be a process and be piece by piece. And then the other part of holding space for your emotions is oftentimes we deny our own emotions to allow others to have theirs so that we can keep the peace. So if someone has a conflicting emotion about a similar experience or the same experience, oftentimes we'll say, okay, you're right. I'm going to push down my emotion and let that be true for you. Had this huge conversation with my oldest, and we talked about some pretty deep things, and something that I held on to and made sure to maintain throughout the conversation was that just because I had an emotion didn't mean that his was negated. So your emotion is your emotion. It's allowed to exist. And do you mind if I tell you what I was experiencing at that same time? Because our experiences were completely different. I mean, he was 10 and I was, 30 or 20 or whatever I was. And our experience was the same, the actual time and place, but our actual experience, our internal experience was completely different. And so I didn't say, well, I was the adult in the situation, so you have to shrink your emotions because what I say is true. Nor did I say to him, well, I'm willing to shrink my emotion because you were the child in the situation and your experience is more real than mine was. I said, we can hold space for both of these things to be true. I could have been doing my best, but it also could have hurt you at the same time. And I apologize for the hurt that you experienced, even when I thought I was doing my best. And that doesn't change your hurt, and it doesn't change the fact that I made mistakes. And so we were allowed ourselves to have that conversation. The struggle happens when you are so attached to peace and you feel like keeping peace with other people is peace, that you will go to your internal chaos and let it be what it is because it's the devil that you know, in order to prevent yourself from causing what you believe to be conflict with other people. And so because of that, you'll say, well, maybe I don't really feel that way. Or, she was a good mom, or he was a good dad, or my sister is a good person. Like you'll justify the behaviors that have caused your emotion instead of just saying, I don't really care what their intention was right now. I don't care, because right now my only goal is to sit with myself and hold space for this emotion. I'm not going to deny my emotion to protect other people or to allow them to have theirs to keep the peace. I'm going to feel what I feel and be okay with holding space to feel that thing. And that is the only way to hold space for your emotions to get to a place of emotional intelligence. So if you're on that journey today, I want to encourage you to really think about, are you emotionally rejecting things? And are you really allowing yourself to the space that it takes to really get into those emotions, process them, and deal with them? And if you're not, and you need a little assistance doing that, certainly you can reach out to me on all social media sites, send me a DM, and I will give you the step-by-step process to doing that, because I've done it on several occasions, because I've been an emotional stuffer my entire life. If this video resonated with you and you feel like you know people who it will resonate with as well, remember that having knowledge for yourself is selfish unless you know that you can share your own testimony and your own information with other people. But the real process to doing this is sharing the same information that got you through the process with other people, so that you guys can become a safe space for each other to break free from the bondage together. And so I would encourage you to share this with the people that you know that it will resonate with. Share it on your social media platforms if you think it would resonate with a lot of people. And I say that because I don't do this for my own self. I really do it because I think that sharing our testimonies with each other, because it's what helped me whenever I needed somebody. Most of my help came from the internet, and those people I will never be able to repay them for the help that they gave me. And I would love to be able to continue to make these videos to help you guys through whatever you're going through. So share if you feel led to share. Comment below how this might have helped you. I appreciate you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.